So welcome. During the course of our hour and a half together, slightly less now, we are going to be digging into the lessons of remembrance that veteran artists can teach us. And my colleague, Ben Brands, will help us unpack some of the symbolism and meaning that's inherent in ABMC memorial sites. And then we're going to bring those ideas together under the SEL umbrella. If you would like to do this starter, it is, as I've mentioned previously, just a way to get some brain space before we jump in. And the intention, just to be really transparent up front, is to warm up our brains to prepare for deeper listening. And that's something that we'll be doing together later in the session. In order to listen deeply, we have to have some space within ourselves. So you might focus your attention by drawing a circle in the middle of the piece of paper and just notice how the pencil or pen moves around the paper. I'm going to move through this fairly quickly, but you can come back to it, of course, in the recording. Inside the circle, if you'll just jot down a little bit about a time that you have felt welcome to share or revisit an important memory, when you are welcomed into remembrance, and what happened inside of you when you did share or remember that important memory. And then if you will remember what was happening outside of you. So what was the situation around you that made you feel welcome to remember? And jot down some ideas about that in the circle. And for our friends who just joined, I'm so glad you're here. We're just getting centered before we jump in. So grab a pen and pencil, or pen and paper, and jump in. And then the last step, again, I'm moving far too quickly, is just when you revisited that memory, whether it's right now when you're doing this step by step together, or the time that you are remembering, in what ways were you strong? So just recognizing that it sometimes does take strength to remember, and in what ways were you strong? That's too rushed. I know, I'm sorry, but I want to be careful about time management, because if you know me, you know I'm really good at running over. So self-awareness, right? It's a SEL skill. I'm going to move ahead, know that this is recorded, and you'll be able to come back to it. The big ideas of our session are, as you can see on the screen. I just want to highlight that what we want you to take away from this session is a little bit of an understanding of what the ABMC's mission is, which is to forever honor the fallen. We want you to have a sense that art provides a means by which we can honor and interpret sacrifice. We want you to take away the idea that SEL can add nuance and connection to all curricular content. So as you go, starting to recognize ways in which these SEL driven approaches are also reaching into history, they're reaching into English language arts, etc. And we want to give you an opportunity, if you want to connect to loss, respecting a variety of experiences and moving forward with remembrance. So recognizing that we may all have had a similar loss that we could categorize similarly, but our responses to it might be different, and that's okay. So again, I'm Elizabeth, and we have this funny little triangle or diamond situation on the slide as a reminder that we're going to move from individual to collective and back to individual. So that's the overall structure of this session. And Ben, who are you?
Okay, so I am Ben Brands. I'm a historian with the American Battle Monuments Commission, which is a small federal agency. And our mission is to administer and maintain America's overseas war cemeteries and monuments, mostly World War I and World War II. So ABMC dates to the massive death of World War I. After World War I, America had to decide what to do with the almost 100,000 war dead overseas. And it was decided that next of kin would get the choice whether they wanted their loved ones' remains repatriated to the United States or permanently permanently interred in an overseas cemetery, they would be cared for in perpetuity by the federal government. About 40% of families chose overseas interment, which resulted in the creation of 8 overseas World War I cemeteries. This process was played out again in World War II, with the result of the creation of 14 World War II cemeteries. And those cemeteries, over the years, we've expanded our mission to include other wars. And today we have 26 cemeteries, 32 monuments across 17 countries, encompassing 124,000 burials, with an additional 94,000 missing honored on the walls of the missing by name. And so our mission is to maintain those sites, but we also have a mission to kind of tell that story to the American public and forever honor and remember these fallen. And part of that is our education program, which is meant to kind of bring this story home to the American public, many of whom will never get to go to our sites. And our partnership with the Smithsonian is part of that, to help kind of bring that story home and help understand the importance of these sites to the kind of American memory and national story. And so I'll turn it back over and we'll talk a little bit more about ABMC as we get further in the program.
Thank you. And apologies, I was hoping that my chat box situation would be solved by restarting it, and I think it hasn't. So if you see the black box moving around, it's me trying to not obscure your vision while also being able to see contributions in the chat box. So to get started, we're going to begin, as I mentioned earlier, in a place with an individual, and then we'll move to a more collective and back to individual again. You may already be familiar with the work of Aaron Toole, and even if you are, I welcome you to bring your prior knowledge with you. This is kind of a busy slide because I wanted to recognize the people who took these photographs, which you'll see on the right side of the slide. But for the moment, I'd like you to just look at the image of a single cup of Aaron Toole's on the far left. And in starting in the individual, I'll just invite you to think about this cup as an individual and begin the slow looking that we often do together, where we are looking intentionally to gather the information that has been presented to us by the artist. Because we would be able to tell scale if we were in real life, but we're looking at this in reproduction, I'll just let you know that this is a cup that's about 5 inches tall, which is about the size of a Coke can, the height of a Coke can. And it was made sometime between 2014 and 2015, and it's made of stoneware. So I'm going to ask you to imagine the last coffee cup that you had in your hand, or the last plate that was probably stoneware. So you kind of start to imagine the weight of it, the heft of it. And stoneware is known to be durable. So thinking about the durability of this cup, the weight of it, the texture in your hand. It's fired at high heat. So now that you have had an opportunity to consider the weight, the texture, et cetera, just really, really zoom in. I'm going to give you, 30 seconds of my silence to just look really carefully at the cup on the left side. And then when you're ready, please put into the chat box or share out loud, whichever way you feel most comfortable, just what are you noticing about this cup as you linger with it? The eyes. Ooh, interesting. Awesome. So in the chat box, people are really noticing the face first. Noticing also perhaps a skull in the top left corner, some curiosity about what is that at the bottom, bringing some prior knowledge, which is fantastic. Anne is noting that the artist is probably using decals, so there is this layering effect that's happening. Amy's making an inventory of the colors that the artist has selected. Ben, Ben, tell me, what do you see that makes you say sandbags? Because these teachers know that if somebody says something and I'm unfamiliar with, I'm going to be like, give me some evidence. So what do you see that makes you say that?
Yeah, so that along the bottom there, that kind of tan piece there looks to me like sandbags, which are commonly used in the military for building kind of defensive positions or fortifications. And then the item right above that, the kind of weird looking triangular rounded top object, that is a standard military issue entrenching tool. So it's currently folded up, but that unfolds. It's a trifold, and so you can see the handle over top of the blade, and then there's a third part that's the actual shaft. And so that's what you'd use to dig in a defensive position, what you would probably use to fill sandbags, which kind of indicates that those probably are sandbags.
Beautiful, thank you. So this is the fun of being able to have people with variety of experience and knowledge in the room, because we get layers of information. I did not know that. Thank you, Ben, for that information. Amanda is noticing that there is a large face behind smaller images. The black and white face is the color, is behind the color maroon in front. Positive and negative of photo images. So that overlapping is really becoming important in our conversation, and an idea perhaps about hiding behind the sandbags or the color. It's like the human being, which is the one that we've noticed first, is the least important to the other things. Thank you, Amanda, for adding that. Kelly is thinking about, now that we're thinking more about the construction of the cup, perhaps this weight, when we start to think about the number of glazes and decals and sort of that sort of thing, how weighty the cup might be. Is one a current portrait and a negative in a Civil War or earlier image? Thank you, Anne. What an interesting wonder. I appreciate that. And Ben is thinking 90% sure that the face is tools. So for sure, like I'm 90% too. I don't know for sure. But we have Aaron Toole on the right side of the screen. And so when we start to think about this man, the man who made this cup, what are you noticing about him? Let's close look at Aaron Toole just for a minute. What are you noticing about him? Sue is noticing a smile. A timeline, Amy says. His eyes never change. He ages, okay. Potter's biceps. Thank you, Anne. Yes, indeed. Ben, do you know anything about his insignia? Is there anything familiar in that image on the left side?
So he's wearing corporal rank, so junior NCO. The kind of shiny badge with the kind of cross, that's a marksmanship badge, and then he's got a series of service ribbons. It's kind of hard to make out what they are, but presumably one of them is Desert Storm, which is known in his biography, and then obviously he's got the National Defense Service Medal, which is awarded to soldiers or Marines who served during time of war. But I mean, it's pretty hard to make out the specific ribbons.
Yeah, well, and I just put you on the spot too, so thank you for thank you for sitting with me. But tapping into that layer of symbolism in these photographs of him. So I want you to imagine then that this man, Aaron Toole, made this cup, and then you were welcomed to hold it. How would it feel in your hand to hold this cup? Anne's adding he's a Marine. Thank you. Solid.
So are you asking me specifically, or is that a question for
anybody who wants to jump in? What do you think, Ben? How would it feel in your hand to receive the cup from Aaron Toole?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think one of the really interesting things about Tool is that he does art as a way to process his own experiences, but he also is very much about handing it off.
Mhm.
And that's he talks about he gives these away. He talks about that how that's how he wants them to be used, hand to hand. And once it's left his hand and gone to your hand, kind of you are now the interpreter of the meaning, which is a very very powerful and an interesting way to use art. He's using it to kind of process his own experiences, but he's also giving up control to some extent.
Wow, thank you for adding that. So, and when I ask the question without the same context, the invitation is very much more about like that, just the tactile, right? Which is super valuable. So we had notes about it being solid and weighty. Perhaps if it was really thrown well, it could be light and balanced. It would feel smooth, cool to the touch. It would feel special. Um, and then as Ben, as you were starting to share, I noticed that the comments in the chat start to change. So ideas about maybe it's not something that you fill with coffee, it's a sacred artifact of his life. We're using the word honor, a vessel for experience, like an unnest item. Oh, thank you for making that connection, Anne. Anne has made the connection to the novel, The Things They Carried, and maybe that's an unmessed up item from that piece of literature. Thank you for that connection. Okay, so then let's look at this cup in situ with others that Toole made. Aaron Toole reflected that a professor of his told him that he shouldn't worry about achieving a meteoric rise to fame. Instead, he said, don't think too much, just make a bunch of work. Show your work and get rid of anything in the work that isn't yours. If you're successful, you'll create your own idiom, your own language. So when you see Toole's cups amongst each other, kind of in the company of other cups, what do you notice about the language that he is using or the idioms that he's connecting to? And let me move my chat box so it's not like covering the artwork. Sure, Amanda, thank you for asking that question. So if Aaron Toole has created his own visual language, when you see all these cups together, what are the components of that language? Or alternatively, what idioms does he seem to be developing?
May I ask or actually comment and question?
Yes, bring it. I love it.
So I was thinking at the end of the cup that we were just talking about, but this is connected, I think, to what you just asked also, that I don't know if I agree that he's giving up the interpretation to someone else as much as this is a way for him to process his thoughts, his ideas, his life, whatever it is that he is processing. And if these are all apparently by the same artist or the same potter, then there are lots of different styles, lots of different topics, lots of different things going on here. So very well could be processing experiences in his life or knowledge that he has.
Oh, interesting. So if I've understood kind of a theme in your share, it's that he has created a varied body of work that is, it feels like it's all his, that it's about his process, and it's hard to square that with the idea of turning control over to somebody else.
Yes, like that was the comment that was made previous that I couldn't quite, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but that was not what I interpreted.
Awesome. Thank you for raising that. That's a beautiful opportunity to unpack together. Thank you. In the chat box, people are noticing that Carol's noting each cup is an individual, so he doesn't seem to repeat. Together, they tell a larger story, a strong use of color, this thick rim with a similar size and shape, war iconography, an epitaph on monuments and missiles. And your vocab is strong. The imagery is in low relief. Gloria, would you be willing to unmute and share with us a little bit more about when you say that, what does that mean? Or add to the chat if you don't want to share.
It's raised from the surface a bit. It's a little bit sculptural.
Ooh, thank you. I like that. Sue is doubling down on that, noting the variety of textures and the different visuals, and Anne as well. Anne is also noticing that some seems to be carved in instead of relief, and different personalities. Sarah is saying different personalities. I love that. Thank you. Ben, if you'd be willing, is there anything that we haven't noticed that it seems like would be important to add? Anything that you know about from your own military history that would be worth bringing up?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that jumps out with this collection here is all of them are related in some way to war, either very directly or indirectly. They use images associated with war and death, or very specific images. There's a Purple Heart on one of the ones on the top. There's a guided missile, or a GBU rather. And so it's really interesting, and we'll learn a little bit more about this when we hear from Tool on the video that we've got a little bit later about kind of how he uses this to kind of deal with his own experiences. But what's interesting is while there's that commonality of kind of war, it's not entirely limited to his experience. Stuff shows up from other wars that he didn't participate in. About the middle of the screen there's an image that is a recruiting poster from World War II, which obviously Tool did not participate in World War II. And then so it's kind of gone beyond his personal experience.
Sure. The gas masks that are in the one immediately adjacent to the Purple Heart, so like third from the left in the top row, is that World War I era gas mask?
Yeah, it's hard to tell with this resolution, but it certainly looks like World War I, and maybe multiple different countries. One of the images looks like a French helmet matched with the gas mask. So, but those look like earlier for sure.
So it's interesting that he's mixing together legacy, right? Like the duration, and in part that maybe has to do with the fact that he's a third generation military serviceman. So we could speculate all day long, which I love. But we're noticing again that this idea of very little repetition, except perhaps the color that's connecting them. So we're going to take a little sidebar just for a moment, because I wanted to make space for a conversation about grief. And I was frankly challenged individually to start to think about grief as more than death, because grief feels like a really big word. And if I let it touch too many other things, it seems like it could be a little overwhelming. So if grief is allowed to be death of a loved one, and also a dream that didn't happen, and also a loss of ability or autonomy, and also a loss of safety or a sense of well-being, or also a lost identity, or anything else that you're willing to let grief encompass, what happens if we let grief be more than just death? What happens? So a question that I'll pose to you for reflection in the chat box. Emptiness. Severing. Reimagining. Amy. You can shut down, stop living in the present, and just go through the motions. Oh, Catherine, it helps us process life as a process instead of the reaction to an isolated event. Grief can be part of a process of changing expectations. Awesome, thank you. So part of the reason I wanted to kind of just get into this in it, explicitly, is because we can grieve differently. We can grief can be instigated for us by different things. And also we are going through a period of grief. when I started to think about the loss of safety or a sense of well-being as grief, I was like, oh my gosh, well, COVID-19 feels much more like it makes more sense that I feel as affected by it as I do, or a dream that didn't happen. Wow, if I let that be grief, then I start to think about there's a reason that when I was 40 and turned 40 and I wanted to go backpacking for my birthday and I couldn't, why that felt more than just like a lost camping trip. It was something bigger. And so this idea of reflection, and then also the opportunity to move beyond and through that is part of what we're going to explore. And in order to get into a place where we can explore with Aaron Toole and his work, I'm going to invite you into a space of mindful listening. And so mindful listening is, we know mindfulness, right? This is a well-used word at this point, but we'll call it the practice of paying attention and being open to the present moment. So mindful listening is about being really present when somebody's talking, rather than making your grocery list on the side of your head, or I'm really good at this one, preparing my counterpoint where I'm like, well, I have something to say to that. It's saying I'm doing that and I'm going to let it be. And listening mindfully is also about receiving with empathy. So we're going to practice with Aaron Toole, knowing that grief can be so many different things. And we're going to listen for some themes in his sharing. So the questions that, the guiding questions, again, this is an intention to practice mindful listening, which is an SEL skill, and will also give us some insights into Toole's work. As you listen to him mindfully, what comes up for you? And then be aware of that and set it aside. Paying attention to his voice and body language. What is he really saying? So realizing that our body language and our tone and all of these things adds flavor, so that sometimes we realize that there's what somebody's saying and then there's a theme underneath. And then again, in mindful listening, recognizing that there's something that we don't know. What questions would you ask in order to better understand him? Hopefully I've done my work so that you can actually hear the video. And here we go.
What it is about having been in the military or the GI Bill that would change. Well, I mean, sure, the objects that people make. I mean, you want to talk, you want to express. I mean, I've maybe misquoted, but Volk is talking about after being in the war, he wanted to make something beautiful every day, that he felt obligated now after taking part in the war to create something beautiful. I think there might be something to that in my own stuff, that I feel like obligated to talk about these things that are so, you know, the war and violence is not fun. It's not, it doesn't come up in polite conversation very often. And it's really hard for me to ignore those young guys that are still out in the sand. And, you know, it's really, it's close to my heart. And, you know, it's a powerful thing. I know at the beginning, people would say, you know, oh, is this cathartic for you? Is this helping you? Is this therapy? You know, and I really kind of mocked that, and it made me angry. But now I'm 14,000 plus cups that I've made. And I think there is something to that, you know, focusing and centering and, you know, making the cups that might, you know, actually be helpful for me, you know, just where you're not, you know, you're not thinking. It's kind of like meditation or something, you know, just making the cups and the repetition of it and being able to put something out in the world. Like I would never say that I speak for all veterans or Americans or Marines or, you know, so it makes me nervous, like with the big grand statements, you know, and so the cup is kind of, it's a little thing, you know, it's not superimposing or, you know, but then you can put things on there that are really heavy images, but they don't, you know, it doesn't read the same on a cup stamped on the side of the cup as it would as, you know, a poster, the same image, but just on a cup, it's a little more approachable, you know, you can kind of spend time with it. And And I said, like, I think that the stories that I know about the Cups, or, you know, the lives they've had, you know, the best things that have happened is conversations, you know, with somebody who's been exposed to war, and then maybe somebody they love, like a daughter or son, and they have a conversation about their experiences. I mean, to me, to be demonized or idolized because of what I did in the war is not okay with me, you know. So, but it's really hard, you know. My son's 9, and you know, we still haven't had that conversation. He asked me, he said, "Dad, how come you were bad and now you're good?" And I said, "What?" He said, "You were a soldier, right?" And I just started crying. I said, "Let's go watch SpongeBob." You know, I couldn't. Let's go watch TV. I can't, because I didn't know how to communicate that. You know, because war is not like anything else. It's not. So I'm, you know, maybe drinking some whiskey out of the cups. You know, you could have a different conversation, and that scale, I think, is the appropriate scale.
So 14,000.
To me, right, having 100 cups on a wall, and you know, you can make connections between the images, and you can make kind of a broader story about what they're about. And it's nice, you know, seeing them all on the wall like that, but it's much more interesting to me to think about the cup going from my hand to your hand to some point 500,000 years in the future, you know, and like the life that picks up, right? If it's sitting in a white box someplace for 1,000 years, but that's not so exciting. But actually, you know, fending for itself out in the world is a lot more exciting for me. And you know, I know some of the cups are precious to somebody, and then somebody, you know, who cares about that person now cares about that cup because it was this person's, and so, you know, it grows that way. It makes a bigger story, which is more interesting to me.
All right, friends. So as you can tell, that was a homemade sort of video. I literally had a blanket over my head and was Zoom recording other interviews. But I wanted to bring the questions back up.
What it
Oops,
is
I'm gonna
about
pause
having
this.
been in the military.
Sorry. I'm going to move my little black box over there. So think back. What themes did you hear? Rather than particular words he said, what themes did you hear? Or another way of thinking about that would be, what are some interconnected ideas that kind of serve as the underpinnings of what Aaron Toole shared about his work or his experience or his motivations? War is not like anything else. Others' reactions, discomfort, sorrow, trauma, and humbleness, creating something from his experiences, uncertainty of his role. Thank you. So if we think those are some of the themes, if that's what we think he might be saying, legacy, thank you for adding that, Jennifer. A deep feeling that is hard to articulate, a drive to make out of the ashes of destruction. Beautiful. So we have this really rich set of ideas. What questions would you ask him, either to better understand him or alternatively to check your thinking? So recognizing that there is maybe something I don't understand in the practice of mindful listening, and being curious and open rather than rushing to an endpoint. What questions would you ask? Gloria got us started at the top with the question, I'm trying to find it, Gloria, and scrolling. Has making the cups tempered the intensity of grief and other feelings? Or is the conversations that the work allows, or is the conversation that the work allows to be reflected on? Is each cup a full story, a chapter, a page, or a line? What other questions would you ask? Were these people that you already knew, or did he research and interview them? What are the pictures you're seeing in your mind or imagination as you articulate your thoughts in this interview? How can I listen better? Sue, what a good question. Anne is noticing that during the interview, he said 14,000 then. How many has he made now? He's made more than 21,000 cups. I do actually know the answer to that question. Do you think it is possible to have grief for your grief? Amanda, I think it might be called complex grief. I don't know. That's a really interesting question. Are there works that can't be shared? What a beautiful question. So when we enter into this space of curiosity and openness to other person's experience, instead of ending in a place of like, I've got you all figured out, we do have sort of welcome them to share more. And so if you link back in your mind to that idea of under what context were you interested or willing to share a tender memory and an intense memory, this is one way to open that space. Kelly's noting rather, after listening to him, I wouldn't want to ask him any questions. I just want to wish him peace. Thank you for noticing that. That's important for you. Let's see, are you attached to one cup more than others? Thank you, Sarah, for that. So we have like questions we want to ask, and he mentioned having 100 cups on the wall, and that's how we display them at the Renwick. And this is a blurry picture, I'm sorry, but I wanted to show you this installation because I wanted to touch into that place of metaphor. So what metaphor does Aaron Toole seem to have created with his work? And you can unmute and share aloud if you like, or not, whatever works for you. Soldiers lined up in formation. Soldiers standing in rows with one has fallen. Anne's curious, what's inside that one? It's a little like an army guy who is tucked behind some of those sandbags that Ben mentioned at the start. So Toole says, my cups have been called my soldiers, just as we're doing here. And then he goes on to say, the vessel has often been used as a symbol for a person. I make work you can drink out of and hold in the hopes that people will spend time with the work. So I want you to imagine the tens of thousands of cups that have gone out into the world from Aaron Toole's hands to somebody else's. And recognize that Toole says he's making war awareness art. And he envisions that his cups will inspire conversations between people. And I want to offer a challenge to us. What are some of the many kinds of conversations that might be sparked by these cups? So recognizing that we may have grief, a shared kind of grief, but different kinds of responses to it, or alternatively, an experience that doesn't inspire grief. So what are some of the many kinds of conversations that might have been inspired by these cups? Collecting stories of family members. I love it. Admiration of some of the artistic parts, leading to forgiveness for missing childhoods, for mistakes, memories of loved ones or yourself. I love that idea of memories of yourself. I love that. Beautiful. Different emotions raised by the images on the cups. Thank you. So I want to transition because we're moving into that space of collective. And here we see the installation photo again, scale and surrounded by other objects in the Renwick. And on the right, we see the Netherlands American Cemetery. And Ben's going to tell us a little bit more about this cemetery in a minute. But just at this point, when you look at these two photographs, will you share in the chat what is different if we were to look at those cups as sort of markers of individuals and memorials and that sort of thing, and we compare it to the Netherlands American Cemetery on the right? What's different? And how might those differences impact the way that people remember them, remember there? And I'm going to have to obscure something in a second because I can't see my chat box, but please do add some notes and then I'll read. Or Ben, you can read what you see in the chat box and then I don't have to block anything. What are you seeing there, Ben?
So we've got a comment from Sarah that the cemetery has crosses that all look the same while the cups are different. Each one's different, which I think is, yeah, one of the most flagrant things that really pops out. From Jennifer, we have feelings of something alive with colorful emotions versus stillness and sadness. The crosses inhabit your own personal space as you walk around them, relate to the body, different from a cup you can hold, right? The scale is much different.
For sure.
And the fixed nature is a really interesting point as well. Color versus no color, crosses the same versus cups individual. Height is different, cups go up from you, crosses go out from you. Yeah,
Oh.
really, that's a very interesting observation. It's for the different perspective, right? Yeah, that's a really interesting concept because that has a huge effect, because when you look at that field of crosses, it has a feeling of, certainly from this angle, of kind of endlessness, whereas the cup display is much more bounded.
Yeah.
Cups have individuality that a single handmade, that contrasts with the cross grave markers. Cemetery reminds of death, even if we are remembering the individual as a person. Cups have a life in them, maybe sad experiences, but not necessarily death. Yeah, I think that's a great point too.
Thank you.
Vertical,
Yeah.
very, very compositional stuff here. Vertical versus horizontal,
Yeah.
curve versus straight lines.
Yeah.
Cups are unique, like people each has a personality.
So let's,
Cemetery, the stones are all the same, which is reflects the military and emphasis on unity.
oh my gosh. Okay, I'm going to pause because we could go on and on forever. I mean, this is so rich. The thing that I wanted to just slot in here from an SEL perspective is, this expert on grief says that grief is our internal response. But what integrates loss and helps us release toward the light of reconciliation is to find safe people and places that allow us to mourn. Mourning, as distinguished from grief, is the shared response to loss. It's grief gone public. So I want to use that as a bridge because, of course, we've been entering into this thought about grief, and then the cemeteries, and Ben, please correct me if I'm wrong, it's not intended to have us linger in the loss, right? It's about a collective acknowledgement. Yes,
to some extent. Certainly, we'll talk about this a bunch, but there is a huge focus on sacrifice and loss, but that is tempered by the other elements of the sites. In a way, I think that is different from Toole's work.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to you, sir. You just tell me when to move the slides along.
Okay, so that was a really incredible response to this slide. I'm really impressed by the breadth of kind of insights that people had about the kind of difference between these fields, which I think in some ways, looking at these, it can feel very jarring and very different, but the insights we had were great. And so let's go to the next slide, and I'll talk a little bit about ABMC, and then we'll kind of explore how ABMC deals with kind of grief and meaning and mourning. And so this is an image from Sicily, Rome American Cemetery, which is located in the Nettuno, Italy, just outside Rome. And this contains 7,845 burials, as well as an additional 3,095 that are memorialized on the walls of the missing here. And these represent the fallen from the campaign, and basically from the landings in Sicily up through the fall of Rome. And anytime we talk about our cemeteries, the starting point is always going to be the grave plots. They're the central and most important element, the reason these cemeteries exist. And really, I can tell you the numbers of how many people are buried here, but as you guys pointed out, with the kind of composition of these crosses, at times it feels like there's an endlessness, right? That they go on, and they very powerfully convey this sense of kind of scale of the sacrifice of World War I and World War II. But how do we understand and explain that sacrifice? And so the grave plots are not the only part of these cemeteries. And perhaps you're wondering why an agency that its primary mission is to oversee cemeteries is running a joint educational program with the Smithsonian American Art Museum. And it's because art is hugely important to how we understand this loss. And so if we'll go to the next slide, this is also at Sicily, Rome American Cemetery. This is inside the chapel. And so just wanting to take a second to look at this piece and kind of, what does this art convey? What is the emotional feeling that is conveyed when you view this art? And you can unmute your mics and contribute over video, or if you're more comfortable throwing it in the chat, that's fine as well, and I can look at that.
Amy, etherealness.
The seeming irony of the line, peace on earth, goodwill among men, seems so ironic in a cemetery, but yet really many great things have happened after, during wars, as far as goodwill among men and people helping people. But it just seems such a juxtaposition.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a little bit hard to make out in this shot, but those four figures at the bottom underneath the central large figure are all holding and playing instruments, which is maybe not what you would expect in the chapel of the cemetery.
Gloria's added the honor and purity from the light color.
Yes.
And Carol's used the word celestial and spiritual, triumphant.
Yes, I would agree. There's a very triumphant feel to this piece, almost celebratory. And that is an interesting element in a cemetery, in that we don't normally associate celebrations or triumph with cemeteries, but this art is helping convey kind of meaning to this sacrifice, and that this idea that there wasn't necessarily death in vain for these who are honored here. And if we'll go to the next slide. So this is that same piece, but kind of zoomed out to show where it actually is in the cemetery. And so it is inside the chapel building. And what you can't read on the walls here, you can see that there's writing covering every inch of the walls of this room. And what that is the walls of the missing. So that is 3,095 names of American service members who died in the Italian campaign, whose remains were never found or identified. And so when you step back and view this art kind of in its context, does that change how you interpret the art itself? Does that change the kind of feeling that it gives when you look at that artistic imagery?
Ben, I'll just add that for myself, when I look at it's sort of like a triptych or like like an icon, the way that the tablet is laid out. When I looked at it by itself, it felt more triumphant. And now that I see all of these names around it, it feels like a wash of sacrifice. So to use the word that was shared before, that juxtaposition it's kind of challenging for me. And noting monumental and encompassing, the size of the artwork is overwhelmed by the names. And Carol's using the word overwhelming again, but also personal. It reminds Sarah of an open casket ceremony where you have a sense of closure when you walk up. Ooh, Anne is noticing that the names make a pattern and rhythm around the space.
Yeah, I think that's a great point too. And I don't know that we've ever really kind of framed it in that terms, but in many ways, in this particular layout, those names, while they're absolutely a recording of loss and are absolutely kind of factual and there to be kind of a record, also contribute to the kind of composition of the room and the feel of the room. They become almost, when you step back, instead of reading an individual name and just look at the wall, that those names, the layout becomes part of the art.
Amanda is noting the names definitely draw you in like lines, and its effective use of line. Yeah, so as a compositional tool, noticing how symmetrical the room is. The art provides a relief in its simplicity versus the overwhelming weight of all the names. And then Anne is curious about the possible significance of the constellations on the ceiling.
So the ceiling is laid out, and it's a very elaborate piece of art. We don't have a picture of it in this presentation, but it is a very elaborate piece of art, and it is laid out to show the night sky in the kind of configuration that would have been on the date of the landings at Anzio. And so the constellations are laid out as they would have looked that night, and then it's got all of the Greek zodiac figures worked into the artwork, is kind of the significance there. And then kind of to step back a second. So this is one of our World War II cemeteries, and our World War II cemeteries differ a little bit from our World War I cemeteries. I talked about how ABMC was founded after World War I. And in World War I, the American Battle Monuments Commission is called the American Battle Monuments Commission because our original role was to build a series of monuments across Europe to honor the achievements of the American Expeditionary Forces. And soon after our founding, to that was added the mission of running these cemeteries. For World War II, ABMC's mission was expanded to include World War II, but when it was, because World War II was so massive and covered the entire globe, there was no kind of independent monument program undertaken for that war. And so our World War II cemeteries are also monuments in the ways that the World War I cemeteries are much more focused on being cemeteries. So the World War I cemeteries have very elaborate architecture, they have chapels, but they don't have the artwork the way that the World War II cemeteries does. Each of the World War II cemeteries has at least one major piece of sculpture work, in addition to significant architectural and artwork throughout. And actually, technically, while our World War II cemeteries are Somme American Cemetery or Meuse-Argonne American Cemetery, for World War II, the formal names of all of our sites are Sicily Rome American Cemetery and Memorial, Netherlands American Cemetery and Memorial. Those are the formal names because they serve as a dual role. And so we'll kind of talk about this as we get a little bit further into exploring these sites. There's 3,095 people represented in the names that you can see in this image. There's 7,845 headstones in the grave plots. But this artwork helps move beyond that to being a kind of a memorial that goes beyond just those that are specifically buried here. And it honors all those who fought and died. So if we'll go to the next slide. This is at the exterior of the building that we just looked at. And so this is kind of the exterior of where that triptych and the walls of the missing are. And if you'll advance, we should get a zoom in. You can see these, one more. These are the two panels that you can see on the exterior wall. So take a look at these and kind of compare them to what we saw on the triptych. Are there similarities? Are there differences in these versus what we saw before? While you guys are thinking about that, I'm going to jump in and answer Anne's question from the chat. So no, ABMC is not directly involved with the National World War II Memorial in Kansas City, which is originally the Liberty Monument. And we're actually coming up very hard on their centennial. They were, the original Liberty Monument before the museum was there, was dedicated in November of 1921. And so all the dignitaries from our allies came over, went to that with General Pershing, dedicated that, and then came back to DC for the dedication of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, which is dedicated November 11th, Armistice Day, what we now call Veterans Day, 1921. And so that is not part of ABMC. It was originally a private memorial. For the centennial of World War I, Congress passed a bill where it became officially a national World War I monument. At the same time, they authorized the construction of a new World War I monument in DC that did fall under ABMC. And so over the past couple of years, we've been updating Pershing Park, the AEF memorial that was in Pershing Park in DC. For those of you familiar with the city, that has been expanded to become the National World War I Memorial in DC, with its counterpart in Kansas City, which is the National World War I Memorial, but also now is the home of the National World War I Museum. Those are private organizations. They're not administered by the federal government. And then like the last little qualification I'll throw on there is that generally speaking, ABMC's mandate is limited to overseas. Our mission is to run overseas cemeteries and monuments. There are a handful of exceptions where we do stateside stuff, but each stateside monument has to be independently approved by Congress for us to run. It's basically an exception to our kind of main mission. All right, so moving back to the arts. Yeah, there's definitely a difference, more upward movement on the interior, more towards the earth and body here. Flowing lines, ungrounded bodies. Carrying the dead to glory. Yeah, actually, that right image is titled Resurrection. And it does represent, obviously, an angel carrying a fallen soldier, presumably to heaven. That's not made explicit because our sites are all non-denominational. And then the other one on the left is Remembrance, with an angel conveying a wreath onto the graves, onto the headstones.
Hey, Anne, I'm curious. I don't actually know what a Valkyrie is. I know there's a song or something with Valkyries, but what is a Valkyrie? Will you unmute or add something to the chat box? Wagner, that's, yeah.
So the Valkyrie are like the Norse mythology. They were usually female beings that were warriors, but also protectresses, if I remember correctly. But they were in charge of if a soldier or somebody died in battle and they caught you in the moment in which your death, they were supposed to take you to Valhalla, to where you would be forever in Odin's company. And then forever from there, you would become, I don't remember what the name of it is, but basically you battle every day and party every night.
There's no rest for the weary. Thank you for that. That's really helpful.
Very Norse idea.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We've got a note, an addition that there's a Star of David amidst the crosses in the left side there. So thank you for adding that detail. I appreciate that.
Yes, which is accurate to our cemeteries. While the kind of iconic view and thought of our cemeteries is these white crosses row on row, Jewish soldiers are buried under Stars of David. And so you do have Stars of David mixed in amongst the headstones in our grave plots. Great question, one that comes up all the time. The only headstones we have are Latin crosses and Stars of David. Stars of David are for soldiers who identify as Jewish. Everyone else, whether they are Christian, Islamic, agnostic, atheist, all get Latin crosses. This, historically speaking, is because these wars were kind of a very different period in American history. It was very much still kind of accepted as a Christian nation, even if it was explicitly separation of church and state. And then after World War I, really there's this kind of, the World War I cemeteries, both ours and as well as the other allied nations, kind of make the cross into a kind of almost non-religious, almost secular religion symbol of war memorialization, and become associated with war dead much more so than just straight Christianity. And so that's kind of one story behind it. And then the other thing is that there was, after World War II, an exploration of doing different headstones for other religions. We actually have blueprints in the archives of mock-ups of possible designs, but it was decided not to do so, largely because there was a vanishingly small number. They could only find 3 total Muslim known dead in any of the sites. And also at that time, unlike kind of today, where we all would kind of associate the crescent moon with Islam, in the 40s and 50s, when these cemeteries were being designed, there wasn't a universally accepted symbol within Islam, the way the cross and the Star of David were for Christianity and Judaism. And so the decision was made that basically anyone who was not professed the Jewish religion would be buried under a Latin cross. And kind of that's the backstory there that we get asked all of the time. And our cemeteries are frozen in time, right? We don't have new burials the way that Arlington National Cemetery does. Arlington National Cemetery, since I think the 80s or 90s, has authorized a whole slew of different symbols for engraving on the slabs. And then the other thing is practical. It's very easy to engrave a design onto a slab headstone, like you have at Arlington. For our headstones, where the headstone actually takes the shape of the symbol, it becomes logistically difficult to do certain symbols. And so that kind of was discussed in the aftermath of World War II, but the decision was made to stick with the Latin cross.
Then we're getting some conversation and ideas about the meaning of the flowers on the left side. Can you tell us more about that?
No.
Darn it.
I don't actually, I've never seen a written kind of, hey, the flowers are supposed to be this specific type and they're supposed to symbolize this. I've always personally thought they were reminiscent of poppies, which are obviously a very common association with remembrance, but I don't know that for sure. And I don't actually know what the national flower of Italy is. I admit this is a hole in my knowledge.
That's useful to have. Keeps you curious. There are a couple more questions coming in the chat box. Does ABMC continue to have cemeteries for wars after World War II?
No, short answer. Long answer is that the military and American public has gone through a changing way of looking at war dead and how they should be treated and who's responsible for them. So very briefly, up to the Civil War, American war dead were buried where they fell. In the cases of either the very rich or in some cases well-known officers, their families would pay to have the bodies brought home to be buried at home. But for the most case, they were buried where they fell. After the Civil War, and actually during the Civil War, because of the fear that all of the fallen were buried in the South, they would be mistreated by former Confederates, the US government takes responsibility for the national military cemeteries. And so there's an effort to bury Civil War dead in national cemeteries. That's the start of the National Cemetery Administration that we have today. And so that's kind of the first time it's buried. World War I being the first major overseas war. For Spanish-American War, the war dead are brought home. There's only a couple thousand of them. It's not that big a deal. as far as logistically. For World War II, the scale of the war and the logistical requirements mean that very early it is decided not to bring anyone home during the war. Everyone is buried close to where they fall during the war. During the war, we have about 2,000 temporary cemeteries spread all across the front lines. After the war is when the decision is made to give families the choice. Quite controversial at the time, both in America and globally. And I'm trying to go through this very quick to respect the actual focus of this lesson. But other countries are opposed to it because France and England, they just lose so many more people than us that they never contemplate bringing bodies home. They just can't logistically. It would be ruinously expensive. And then also within the United States, there's a huge debate where some people believe everyone should be brought home. Some people believe everyone should be left overseas. And there's this kind of compromise decision that we'll leave it up to the next of kin. Same policy, basically, they copy that policy for World War II, essentially. After World War II, for a whole bunch of cultural reasons, the military goes to a policy of what is called concurrent return. And that's the policy we still have in place to this day. And so basically, if you are killed in action as an American service member, as soon as it is possible to recover your body, it is recovered and sent home to your family. That's the policy we follow today. That's been the case since Korean War. So after World War II, there are no overseas military cemeteries the way that we have in World War I and World War II. Now, the weird exceptions to this are we have AVMC over the years has collected responsibility for 3 one-off cemeteries. There's Clark Veterans Cemetery in the Philippines, Corozal American Cemetery in Panama, and Mexico City American Cemetery. Mexico City American Cemetery dates from the Mexican War. It had been run kind of by the U.S. Embassy for a long time, and then it's handed over to us in, I want to say, the 1920s. And it is mostly, there is a mass grave of unknown Mexican war dead, and then basically a bunch of expats that lived in Mexico over the next 100 years are buried there. So you've got a lot of Civil War veterans that worked for the State Department, stuff like that. Clark Veteran Cemetery was an Air Force cemetery in the Philippine Islands, but then the Air Force closed that base and it comes into our control. And then Corozal dates the building of the Panama Canal. And Corozal and Clark are different from all of our other sites in that they're still active cemeteries. If you are a veteran of the military, you are authorized to request burial at one of those. And we still have burials there every year. Sorry, that was a very long answer for a very simple question.
It's fascinating though, because if you think about how do you process, and which was part of what we're here to do, thinking about the location of a person that you've lost and why you might want that place to feel special and cared for, whether or not you want the person to be differentiated from others or not. It's all in there for sure.
Yeah, I think that entire conversation and changing way we've dealt with war dead really talks to the kind of larger conversation about how do we mourn the dead and who do the dead belong to? Is it the family that owns the dead and is responsible for carrying them? Is it, in the case of war dead, is it the government's responsibility, and should the government step in? And that has the kind of view of what America has believed on that has changed over time, and that's led to these kind of different policies. Yeah. But I do want to steer us back towards the art, and so I think I'll close on this. We've talked a lot about, but yeah, even though these are very similar images as far as the motifs that appear, the angelic figures, they have very different feels. And that's conveyed in both the content and also you have the upward lines in the interior, you have kind of horizontal lines throughout here. And it's a very powerful feel, but it all kind of works together. And if we'll go to the next slide, I'm going to hit this pretty briefly. But on the left there, the bigger image, that is Brothers in Arms, which is the sculpture work at Sicily, Rome, which we've been looking at all the other art at Sicily, Rome. And so this is actually contained inside, if you go back one slide. So you're going to see it in the center of that building. You can see very lightly, you can see that statue. All right, so let's go back to the statue, forward one. And just, I wanted to bring this up because we were talking about Cicely Rome, and there's all these different works of art that work kind of in concert to provide meaning to this loss. But I do want to highlight that this statue is actually very unique in ABMC cemeteries because it depicts a U.S. Army soldier and a U.S. Navy sailor arm in arm. And it depicts them from World War II, which is very uncommon in our sites. If you look to the right, that is a piece of sculpture work called Youth Triumphing Over Evil from our Brittany American Cemetery. And this is much more typical of our statue work in that it is not a World War II soldier. Almost all of our artwork is classical and allegorical. And so I guess I'll pause here and ask, why do you think that is the case? Or what role do you think that serves? Which of these speaks more powerfully? Yes, this is a very obvious ripoff of the St. George and the Dragon.
Which is interesting because it isn't angelic in its depiction, but by having a biblical reference, it's still getting us to heaven somehow. And then I think it's under a rose window, which is also interesting.
Yeah, and actually I don't have an image in here, but that's a very powerful use of the kind of the white stone of the statue against the gray granite of the building. And if you had a picture of the building, it is the architecture of the building is very classical, kind of Norman church, which I wish I had in here, but we've already got like 1,000 photos, so. Yeah,
Your
what is the
question
power of
then
allegory?
is the power of allegory. Sue's adding the word timeless. Sometimes when we talk about nudity and artwork, we talk about that a nude, by being essentially stripped of the signature of what time they're living in, they become completely out of time and classic.
Yeah, I think that's an important element.
I'm thinking also about how allegory lets us into a place of imagination. It's like it feels a little bit more spacious than like if I was to put a juxtaposition here, I could juxtapose it with something that feels more like a recruiting poster. A recruiting poster is very straightforward. Like this is what we're up to. But allegory is much more like there's a lot of ways in and a lot of connotations that that elevate my thinking.
Yeah, and I think that's the main reason is that it's a really good point on the timelessness of it. It divorces it from the specific war. And I would argue that it divorces it from the individual too. Right? You could look at the statue on the left here and imagine that that is a specific soldier who fought and died and is buried here. You're not going to think that when you look at youth triumphing over evil, right? Which brings the meaning that it's conveying to the front. It is not representative. It is conveying meaning. And that's really the purpose of the art in our sites is if the grave plots convey sacrifice and the scale of sacrifice and the individual names and individual headstones convey the kind of individual loss. It's the artwork that allows us to give meaning to that loss. And that's kind of what that art works for. And we'll go to the
Carol,
next.
I just wanted to let you know in the chat box, Carol's saying using allegorical images links the soldier's sacrifice to all those in the past who have given their lives for a cause. So linking backward and then arguably also forward in time.
Yeah, no, that's a great point too. And then the other element that all of our World War II sites and all our World War I sites for that matter have is in addition to the artwork, we also have battle maps. And so if the artwork provides kind of that allegorical meaning, these maps also convey meaning by showing the actual achievements, right? You can look at this map and see what these soldiers' deaths accomplished. And this ties very closely to another important part of our cemeteries is that if you look at about 1/3 in from the left, there's a little kind of point of land with a bunch of ships heading towards it. That is Nettuno, where the landings happened. And if we go to our next slide, this is an overhead shot of the cemetery. That city all around it is Natuno. The cemetery is located on land that many of these soldiers died to liberate. And so that feeling of place is another really important part of why these cemeteries and how these cemeteries convey meaning and how they're linked to the history. And then I guess I would finish on all the elements we've looked at work together in concert, right? That's the idea that we saw a little bit with the tool display, right? Is that we have all these individual works of art, but they also combine to become something bigger, to combine into the entire cemetery, I would argue, is its own work of art. And in this case, this incorporates place, as in it's on land that many of these soldiers died to liberate. And it also incorporates the terrain. If you think back to that first image I showed, it's horticulture that matches the local area, and it uses the terrain to powerfully convey the same meaning that all the art is designed for. In Sicily Rome's case, it's built on a gentle hill. And so the entire cemetery is designed to use that. And if you'll advance one more slide, what you'll see is that works in concert with the layout of the cemetery and the art to draw the eye to that kind of central chapel building. And so I'm speeding up because we're running out of time, but we use art to convey meaning. And that's a very important way to kind of convey the emotional sense of this loss, but also help understand it and process it. And then the other thing we do at our sites is each of these headstones and each of these names does represent a specific person. So if you go to the next slide, well, we have that kind of overall message and impact that the art helps convey, that the art helps de-individualize this, right, and convey the overall meaning. We're still very strongly tied to each individual cross. If you go one more slide, I'll finish on that. Is another hugely important part of our message is not just maintaining these sites as places of remembrance, but also telling the stories of those that are buried there. And so this is James Norton and Edward Norton, who are twin brothers from South Carolina. They were pilot and co-pilot on the same plane, conducting a raid into Nazi-occupied Holland in 1943. Their plane is shot down and crashes in the North Sea. James's body washes ashore. Edward's is lost in the North Sea. James's body is buried during the war. The Germans find his body and bury him in a local Dutch cemetery. After the war, the American Graves Registration moves his bodies to Margraten, where there's a temporary US military cemetery, and inters him there. And like I said, the next of kin are offered the chance to decide whether their loved ones will be repatriated back to the United States or whether they'll be buried overseas permanently. And so they write to James's father, James Norton Sr., to ask him what they want done with James's remains. Does the family want his remains sent back to the United States, or do they want them to be permanently interred overseas? And I'm just going to read very briefly from his response. So this is James Norton Sr., and he says, on the form where he elects to have James buried overseas in one of our cemeteries, he says, "As I have so often said before, this boy is one of twins, the other now lying at the bottom of the North Sea, not far off the coast of Holland. And never having been separated in life, they're as close as they can ever be, just where they are. And so I wish this boy to stay exactly where he is, not only for this moment, but forevermore." And so today, James Norton Jr. is buried at the Netherlands American Cemetery, Plot P, row 16, grave 5. And Edward Norton Jr. has his name engraved on the walls of the missing at the same cemetery. And I think we have 124,000 of these stories. And I think if you want to talk about kind of social emotional learning, if you combine that kind of the meaning that art can help provide with the individual stories and the empathy that these stories can provide, it really is a powerful way to experience history and teach history. And so I'm going to end there and go to our next slide. We've run quite a bit longer than I hoped to run, but it's been great. And so I'll very briefly say, if you have any desire to learn more about our agency and our cemeteries, cruise on over to www.avmc.gov, where we've got information of all our sites, as well as some educational resources to help educators like you all. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Elizabeth and hope that she doesn't murder me for going way over time.
Oh, no, it was so good. And the beauty of doing it this way is that it was driven entirely by curiosity and questions. So people were hungry for more. Anne, I see your question. I think what we're going to do is, Ben, if you want to answer that question in the chat, that'd be super helpful. I'm just going to ask you to spend a minute in personal reflection. So as a reminder, we started with Aaron Toole. We unpacked a little bit about what it would be like to hold the cup and pass it hand to hand. We learned a little bit about Toole from his interview, and we practiced some deep listening there. And then we started to consider the many kinds of grief and the implications of allowing grief to be larger than the death of a loved one. And then we learned more about ABMC and their mission and the way that they use artwork to convey emotion and give a place for remembrance. So if you look back at that experience for yourself, and my ask is actually that you not put any of this in the chat box. Let's just let this be for you. What kinds of losses surfaced for you today? So recognizing, just as we did with mindful listening, that when we are listening to others, when we are learning, we have our own responses to the things that we hear, the things that we see. So recognizing those and paying homage to them. And recognizing also what it was that brought it up. So just for yourself, reflect for a moment, if you will.
Oh dear.
And then if you were to feel welcome or safe to share about that loss that surfaced for you today, what would you need in your world? What would you need to hear them say? What is the context that would make you feel safe or welcome to share about that loss that surfaced for you today? And again, you're just doing this for yourself. And then just as we did at the start, in what ways have you been strong right now to just linger in this reflection? So this is an opportunity to acknowledge your own strength in walking into a place where we're asking you to consider loss. And then we're going to switch to totally pragmatic last 5 minutes, which is, hey, we told you this is an SEL workshop, so let's put a bow on this, friends. The questions that I would ask in order to get us thinking about this is to start to think about what's valuable for you that happened today, if there was anything. Hopefully there was. Something that you heard, thought, or felt that was valuable in this session. And then this is the question that I'd like to actually talk out with you all. How does the thing that you heard, thought, or felt during this session connect to the SEL framework? So if you're not entirely familiar with that, that's okay. I'm learning too. Self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness are all kind of buckets that other more like fine-grained skills fit into, but they mostly have to do with how do we live together? Like how do we manage to be together in the world? And then we recognize that all of those skills are situated within the circles that you see, the concentric circles moving outwards. So when we are deliberately cultivating an SEL instruction and climate, classroom climate, that's our space. Then moving out from there, there's the school that our classroom is within, the family and caregiver circle, so your wider school community, and then even larger than that, this community that you're situated within. So how does what you saw, felt, or heard connect at all with the SEL framework or with your curriculum? something I recognize is that often I hear from teachers, because it's an overwhelming year, I don't know how to do SEL and what I'm responsible for teaching, but I'm being told I need to also do SEL. And what I appreciate about what Ben offered us was a way to think about history that is peopled with individuals and their families who had to make hard choices. And when we occupy a place to remember them and feel about them, history feels a lot more present for me, which becomes about relationship skills and social awareness for me, recognizing that there are differences between me and others, but I need to build those bridges. The last question I would ask is, why in the face of the pandemic might it be valuable to move toward remembrance rather than finding meaning? And what I mean by that is, and I'm going to read you another quote. There's this psychologist who specializes in grief. She says, it's important that we start recognizing that we're in the middle of collective grief. We're all losing something now. The losses include our sense of projectability, control, justice, and the belief that we can protect our children or elderly loved ones. We're capable of losing places, projects, possessions, professions, and protections, all of which we may be powerfully attached to. This pandemic forces us to confront the frailty of such attachments, whether it's to our local bookstore or the routines that sustain us through our days. So when I'm thinking about finding meaning, for me, it feels like, okay, I got to get to the point where I know why this happened, and I can say, like, there's a comfortable resting point in it, and I just can be done with it if I can find my why. Whereas remembrance, to use the word that came up earlier in the chat, feels a bit more like a process, and especially for a period that we're not done with and we may never be done with because there's repercussions that we don't know what they'll be. That's where I stand on that question, but I don't know where you stand. So I'd be curious to know. Ben, what do you think?
Sorry, I had to find my mute button.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is a struggle, right? And I think COVID in some ways is a very different type of loss to deal with than what ABMC normally focuses on. And so I guess the first thing I would say is that I'm stepping away from speaking for my agency at this point, because this is well beyond our mandate. But I think it is something there is a very important social component to it, and that is something we have not done enough of as a country yet. And part of it's because we're still in the middle of it, but that I think having some sort of social mourning, and if we discussed earlier about the difference between mourning and grief, individual versus social, that is something that I think would be very helpful for a lot of people to deal with the last 18 months.
Yeah.
But I don't know, because I still struggle with it myself.
Yeah. We're all works in progress, aren't we? So I want to let you know that we have extras, including lots of resources on loss for children, and thinking about how COVID-19 has been impacting the kids in your classroom, and you and me and all the people we know, but then also recognizing that there are really smart people in the world who can help us figure out how to move through this and turn our grief into mourning so that we get to be together, and kind of spreading our arms to one another, and listening. I am grateful that you're here. I hope that if you have any extra questions, you'll drop them into the chat and we can stay a little bit, or I can stay a little bit after. Please also do let me know if you would like a certificate of participation, and you can do that by just sending me an email. So thank you. I'm going to turn off the recording, and